and welcome to the Stop Shitting All Over Yourself podcast, episode 93, with me, your host, Manessa Konecki. And today I am so excited to introduce to you Goli Kalkhoran, who is amazing host of the podcast, Lessons from a Quitter. She has the most incredible camera and setup you've ever seen. Like, she got on the camera, I was like, holy shit, lessons taken from you. But what I really love about Goli, which is, we had a conversation about this extensively, is the hidden power of quitting courageously. Her podcast is called Lessons from a Quitter, and what she really talks about in a very deep and meaningful way is, how do you know when it's time for you to quit, move on, do something different, stop doing something and start something else? And how do you know when you're just running away from something, right? How do you know if this is an unhealthy coping mechanism? She also focuses a lot on quitting and ending things to be able to create space in your life for other opportunities and other things. Because one of the challenges I think that exists in our society today is that we were conditioned and socialized into believing that, you get a job and you do that job for the rest of your life, right? And this was the case for many of us who grew up in the 80s and the 90s. The world is very different now, and we have realized that we don't want to do the same thing all the time, and that sometimes environments that we are working in are unhealthy for us, they're unsafe for us, but we stay because of either some misguided sense of loyalty or a fear of what possibilities, what the negative consequences might be, the stories that we're told growing up. Oh my God, you can't be a job hopper. Like, there's so many things that we are conditioned into in our society that make it hard for us to make actually fair decisions for ourselves, right? Because we make so many of our decisions based off of our responsibilities to other people, and or based off of the stories that we have been conditioned into. And so her approach is very much about, how do we navigate some of these ideas and reframe our perspective on quitting to becoming about opportunity and not about giving up, which is the story that we've been told so far. And the truth is, we can rewrite that story, because all stories are made up. This is a story that's made up, and Goli is going to help us do that. Listen into our conversation and let's see what it springs up for you. And let me tell you why I love it. Because there's many reasons to love you. And let me tell you why it is that I was almost everything that you talk about is stuff that I believe so much in my core, and, I've sort of gone through this same process, but I realized about 3 years ago that I always thought I was the person who would be the one to help people. And then I realized I'm actually not that person. I'm the connector. I connect people to the people who help them. And one of the biggest lessons that I think, I've struggled with in people that especially in the industry that I come from. So I've done a lot of different things, but right now what I do to make money is I'm a research administrator working with hospitals and biotech and pharma to manage grant funds. It's a giant industry where the people in it are because the veterans are aging out and we're having trouble getting new blood coming in. And so it's really challenging for people in these high activity industries, especially academia and healthcare, to understand where the line is for healthy work versus not healthy work. And so, that hit me, the very first thing I wanted to really ask you about was this idea that we have been conditioned and I'm feeling myself tearing up even talking about it, our whole lives, that quitting makes you a failure. You're bad. This is wrong. It's not just not doing something. There is a judgment on your humanity. Totally. Can you share a little bit about how the journey that you had to go on to go from that belief to where you ended up?
Sure. Yeah. I think that for me, I was a lot of people that sort of, it was brought up in our school system where you're just told to kind of follow this path and put your head down and do these things and get as close to an A+ as you can and memorize. And there's no really room for anything else. And all of success, if you look in our society, truly the markers of success tend to be longevity. Whether, a successful marriage is how long you're married. It doesn't matter if you're miserable the whole time and you guys are abusive to each other. If you're married 20 years, then that's a successful marriage, right? Same thing with careers. A lot of what we are taught is you pick a path when you're a child, basically, when you're 18, whatever, you go to college, you're still, your frontal lobe hasn't fully developed, but just pick something and then stick with it for the rest of your life. And like, that's going to be your career. And you're going to, and this was obviously the way that it used to be. It's now changed a lot, but I did that. I was, lucky enough that school was easy for me. And so I did well in school. And so especially when I think like if you are a type A personality, if you are someone that has success within that structure and that system, it's easy to not ask any questions. It's easy to be like, oh, I'm going to get my pat on the head. I'm doing it right. I'm just going to keep doing it. And I think like I became a lawyer and I became successful at that. And it wasn't until you did all the things where you thought, okay, I'm going to keep checking these boxes and then I'm going to become successful and happy. And then you become quote unquote successful, but you're not happy. And I was like, I got there and I was like, what is it? Like, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. It was like the first time that I sort of looked up and was like, wait, how did I get here? Why do I want to do this? And I think that for me, it was a very long journey of like getting to where I am now, but that quitting part of it was like, there was so much shame. There was so much baggage of this word of like being a failure, of not being able to cut it, all these like things that we have these phrases of like winners never quit and quitters never win or whatever bullshit we've all been fed, right? And I think like for so many of us, I'd internalize that like, no, you have to suck it up, work's not supposed to be fun. You're an adult and just like do what you're supposed to do and be successful and show this facade to people that you are, you're making money and you have the white picket fence and you're doing all that. And I just really got to a point where I was like, I can't do this. And I think it was a real like identity crisis for me because I'd always only ever been on the path to being a lawyer or becoming a lawyer or working as a lawyer. And so it really had to be like, well, if I'm not a lawyer, then what am I? Right? If I'm not the person that was like the straight A student, what am I? If I'm not constantly achieving and successful, quote unquote, what am I? And so I really had to like grapple with this idea of what does it mean about me if I quit? What do I want to make it mean about me? And that has obviously led to a really beautiful thing for me because I really just wanted to redefine that word. And I really was thinking about like, how absurd it is because we're always quitting things and you have to quit things as you grow and learn and discover who you are and change and stuff. And so I really just kind of went on this journey and started my own brand and, podcast. At the time I wasn't trying to start a brand. I just started a podcast called Lessons from a Quitter because I wanted to start changing this connotation because so many people, I would look around like I left, but so many of my friends who are lawyers, who are miserable, who are on like antidepressants and anti-anxiety and having panic attacks and like working 80 hours a week and not seeing their kids and hating their lives. And I was so irate that more people weren't just leaving and doing something else and being like, hey, this isn't for me. And so, yeah, that's the long-winded story of like where I started and where I ended up.
Oh, love that story. I got to ask you though, there's that moment. So I actually had this question, but you dovetailed right into it on your own you check all the boxes, right? The one where you're like, and I remember checking all the boxes and I had all the things, I had all the money, like all the money. And I was like, I hate my life. I hate myself. I hate everything. And I felt in that moment, like the rug had been pulled out from under me. Like I was just like, what the hell am I supposed to do now?
Yeah, totally.
And so, I want to actually go to you mentioned something, you talked about the story, all the bullshit stories we've been fed, right? And and for those of you who are listening to this later, on Goli's page, there's a link for this where you talk specifically about this, the stories that we tell ourselves. So one of my biggest, and my sister and I talk about this a lot, is that things happen, whatever that thing is, and then you write a story about it. And sometimes you pages in before you even realize that none of it is real. Like you literally just created all this. So I'm curious to know the moment where you realized, shit, I'm just telling myself a story. And like, how did you feel in that moment? Like, were you like, oh God, like, did it make you angry?
Yeah.
Were you like, shit?
Yeah. What's funny about that is I don't think that ever ends. What's funny is like, I still tell myself stories, right? Like, it's not as though I've become now this enlightened being that like, I can fully see things as just neutral. I think that what I realized when I started learning was like, oh, my brain is constantly doing this. Like I get something is happening in the world, something happens to me, and instantly I go back to these rehearsed stories that I've had about myself. And it's so funny the more I do this work, the more I learn about this stuff, the more I learn about the brain, the more I teach on this stuff, the more I see like how much of our identities, how much of our personalities, quote unquote, that we think is our personality is just the story that we've told about ourselves that's not actually true, right? It's like, it's just this thing that has come from like childhood. And so I'll give you like one example that I share a lot in my community is I am somebody who, for better or worse, I've never had like a ton of energy. I've never been the person that's like gets up and wants to hit the ground running and is constantly wanting to be active and wants to be outdoors. I'm just not that person. I'm the person that likes to nap. I like to be on a couch. Like if I have a choice between doing something and doing nothing, I'm always going to choose nothing. Like I just want to like do as little as possible. And so
I love you. I knew I loved you.
Yeah, we were kindred spirits. Because of that, though, I had this very deep story that like I'm a lazy person. I'm a lazy person. I would repeat that story my whole life. It was like, and my whole family was in on this story, and it was like this whole joke, and it still is a joke about in my family about how lazy I am and whatnot. And I realized when you're saying this, like one of the things that I've had to do over this journey of really like learning about who I am is I realized how much evidence I had to ignore to keep up this story that I'm lazy, right? Like I had to ignore everything I had accomplished, everything I had done, everything I was doing every day to keep telling myself like, oh no, I'm lazy. I can't do that. I'm too lazy. I can't, like I would ignore the fact that I was a straight A student and that I got into a top 10 law school and I went to law school and I graduated law school and I worked as a whatever, but I'm a really lazy person. And I say that to say like my personality had become that. I was like, oh, I'm just this lazy person that doesn't have the energy to do. And when I started questioning, I was like, why am I making this story about myself? Why am I creating this when there's times where I like to rest and there's like, I love resting, but I also clearly get things done. I also clearly have the capacity to do the things I need to do. And I just say this like, it's not to say that I've completely upended all the stories I create about myself. Like it still happens all the time where it's like you get, a rejection letter from somewhere or like I'll apply. Let's say I want to get on a podcast or something and then they say, no, thank you. Of course, immediately my story is like, oh, they hate me. I'm not good enough. I don't, it's like we all go there where it's like, no, they could have just like they didn't even read your stuff or it was some intern that didn't want to like have you on the show or they're already full for the year or whatever. Like it could be a million other reasons, but we go to like, oh, it must be that I'm not good enough, that I'm not smart enough, that they don't like me or whatnot. And so I think for me, when I started doing this work, there was a lot of different stories. Like I kept thinking, well, when I first started realizing, oh, I can think about this in a different way. I don't have to think about it like this. Like I could think that me quitting means that I'm a failure and that I couldn't hack it as a lawyer. Or I could think that like this is me taking control of my own life and deciding what I want to do for my life, or like deciding I would. And like I get to tell whatever story I want there. And the story that I choose to tell greatly impacts how I, feel in my life and how I move through my life. And so I remember more, it was more that realization that shocked me more than anything. I remember learning that and being like, wait a second. I can just think whatever I want. I can change the story and think another story. Like, why has no one ever told me this before? This is so great,
Oh my God. You know what's funny about that is I remember thinking that too. Is like, why hasn't anybody told me this before? And so I grew up in Karachi and we had like a family. It was like a 3-story house with like a whole bunch of family members in there. Right.
Yeah.
And so the aunts and the uncles and the grandparents and everybody lives there. Right? So everybody was always saying words are important. The words you say are important. And when I realized this, I think I was 44, maybe 43. So I'm 47 now. And I said, why didn't anybody tell me this? And I was like, shit, they did. They all, my dada, my dadi, everybody was trying to tell me this my whole life. But I think the next step on that is that you have to be ready to hear, right? Like you have to be, there's a receptor that has to be ready 100%. To sort of receive the information.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's why there's that, the quote, like when the student is ready, the master will appear.
Yep,
like, truly, it's like if you're not ready to take it in, you don't see it. And it's there. It's all over the place. But it's like until you get to that place, and for each of us, it's different life events or whatever. And it's always these like moments of reckoning or these enlightenment. And it's beautiful. But even now, like I'm like, I know there's so much probably that I'm missing because I'm not ready to hear it yet. Mm-hmm. And in a year, 2 years, 5 years, I'm like, oh my gosh, why didn't I know this earlier?
Oh, I totally agree. And going back to that one you were saying earlier about laziness, I'm curious, have you read the book Laziness Does Not Exist by Devin Price?
Yes.
So good, right?
So good.
Love it.
So good.
When you said that, it actually made you talked about I like rest. And there's something I've been thinking a lot about. I follow the NAP ministry who talks a lot about how, I know, right? Yeah. Rest as resistance. And this idea that the constantly be doing is a colonial capitalist idea that we've internalized within ourselves.
Totally.
And I think it's been very freeing. On one hand, there's that frustration where you realize, oh my God, I've been telling myself these stories my whole life, and almost like, God, I wish I had known this earlier so I could. But on the other hand, it's that you realize I can co-create my world. Like I just need to say the
Totally.
words, right? And it almost seems like, I mean, that sounds like it's almost too simple, but it kind of is that,
Yeah.
right?
No, yeah, we have a way of overcomplicating things, but yeah, it is truly that simple. I do think the thing is that we have all been so programmed for so many years, and so it's one thing to intellectually understand something, it's another thing to fully embody it or to understand it. So I think, I still realize like I fully subscribe to the Nat Ministries ministry, right? And her explanation about what hustle culture and capitalism, and we can all see it in this productivity culture that it has, and I can fully understand it. And still, we've all been so programmed with this like idea that our worth is solely tied into our productivity. And so like when we don't feel productive, like, or when we feel lazy, we beat ourselves up, or we think like I should have done more today, or I didn't get enough done, or I'm always behind, all of these things. And so it's a constant struggle. It's just like, we can understand intellectually that the beauty industry has completely warped our ideas of like what beauty should be and has created all these body image issues. And yet it's another thing to fully be accepting of your body, right? Like we can understand that those two things happen. And so I think for me, it's still a constant struggle, right? It's like, I get that, like I still want to rest. And yet I know there's times where I feel really guilty. Like I shouldn't be laying all day. I should get up and do something, or I should, and a lot of that is me working on those thoughts to like find acceptance of like, no, it's okay for me to take a day and not do this. It's okay for me not to get things done on the weekend. It's okay for me not to, and it's a constant thing. And I that's a lot of what I coach people on, is because I think a lot of people see these things or hear them and they're like, yeah, totally. But then why do I still, feel guilty or feel like crap when I do this? And I'm like, yeah, well, because like you've been so programmed with these beliefs that like you do have to practice these thoughts, and it is as easy as like, if I adopt this thought, but your brain has created that neural pathway back to like, I need to be productive. And so it's going to keep going back there, and you have to keep bringing it back to like, no, we're not doing that anymore. You're like, we're going to rest now. We're going to like listen to our body now. We're going to give ourselves this time now.
I think that's so important what you just said, because that is the crux of the problem, I think, is the operationalization of these ideas, is that we think that once we intellectually know it, then that kind of solves the problem. You've checked off the box. But really, it's about when you're faced with these challenges every day, how do you respond? And every time you respond in alignment with whatever it is that you're, because like you have to stop and say, I don't want to go down that road. I'm going to go down this road, but that takes effort. And I think that those were the moments for me where I would be willing to give up, because I think to myself, oh, it's not working. I know this thing, but it's not working. But that's not what it is. That's actually the muscle that you're kind of like, you know what it's like? It's like if you were going to work out, right? So if I'm working out like this, and this is not how I work out. I mean, if I worked out at all, but assuming this is how we did it, if I went then to try to lift a bed with this one hand and been like, oh, I'm not lifting the bed. Clearly my weightlifting isn't working. And I think that there's a gentleness, like, and I love that you said that you work with people on this, because how much do you feel that the almost collaborator in this conversation of judgment plays into it? So like when somebody's trying to make these changes and that judging of themselves, how important do you think it is for us to release ourselves from judgment as we go through this process?
100. I mean, it's the most important thing. And I think it's one of the biggest things that stops most of us. And if we go back to like the same thing that we were talking about, even from the beginning, like this word quitting or whatnot, I think for so many of us, we're just raised in this society that demands perfection. And for so many people, the idea of quote unquote failing is so horrific that like we won't even try new things because we don't want to fail. And so we have this idea is like, as soon as I do something, I should be able to do it perfectly. I should be able to do it, expert level. I should get it, right? And so we get so, it's not even just the failing, it's then the judgment of like, what, I'm just not good enough at this, or I'm doing this wrong, or I'm, and really like understanding that with anything that you do, it's going to be a bunch of like fail until you succeed at it, or you learn and you keep doing it. And like you said, I mean, I use the analogy all the time about working out. It's like you can learn very easily how to get a six-pack. It doesn't mean you go one time to the gym and you're going to have a six-pack. It means like you have to build those muscles like over and over and over and over again until you build up these muscles and you build up the strength. It's the same thing with mindset work, with mental health stuff. It's like it's a muscle that you haven't really utilize. So like if you're not used to self-compassion, if you're used to constantly, if that inner critic in your mind is so mean and it's constantly judging you and constantly tearing you down, you might want to be compassionate, and you're going to try that, and it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel bad. It's going to feel like lifting a weight for the first time. It's heavy and it doesn't feel good and it's awkward, and you're like, I'm not doing this right, and nothing is even happening, And so, and you have to keep doing it over and over and over again until you start replacing that other voice, until you like build that muscle of like, oh yeah, we're not going to shame ourselves, And so I think that that getting rid of the judgment is the only way to allow yourself the kind of self-compassion to keep trying. Because if you're constantly like, I should have gotten it by now. Why am I not getting it? There's something wrong with me. Like you immediately want to give up because it feels terrible to feel that kind of shame, right? That self-shame. So it's like, okay, this doesn't work. I'm just going to quit. Instead of like, no, this is working. This is the way it's supposed to work. I'm going to keep feeling terrible doing this until I get to the point where I can actually implement it.
Which dovetails brilliantly into another article that you have on your website. It's almost as if you're guiding the whole thing, where you talk about, because I remember realizing this too, and I'm in this very moment, I'm going through like a big change in my life, right? And so I have that feeling of discomfort as you go through. It's for, because we go through these every so often where you're like big changes, right? And I'm very uncomfortable. I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm so uncomfortable in general. So you talk about this. So can you look at this, guys? I'm going to get coaching right now. This is my whole secret weapon. So tell me a little. Let's talk a little bit about that. Like when you're having those moments and you're making those changes, it's really uncomfortable. And you talk about in your article getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I think that what a lot of us, this goes back to like everything we were talking about with the story and that we create about ourselves. There's a concept in psychology that is called like clean pain versus dirty pain. And so clean pain is like, let's say, someone breaks up with me, I'm going to be sad. That's clean pain. Like you should feel sadness. Let's say you feel disappointment. It didn't work out. Maybe you're feeling some grief, whatnot. All of that's fine. You should process those. Like we don't want to be toxically positive. We don't want to always be like super excited about everything. Like we're not happy when someone breaks up with us. That's okay. What happens with a lot of us is that we add on a lot of dirty pain, which is the stories that we were talking about, right? So the stories of like, I'm not good enough. No one's ever going to love me. I'm never going to find anybody, and we create so much more shame and blame. And like, I can't believe he did this and he's an asshole and I'm terrible and whatever. And we create so much more negative emotion as opposed to like, can I just sit with the sadness and the grief of the fact that this relationship is over, Going back to the discomfort thing, I think what happens a lot of times is whenever you're going through any kind of transition, or if you're ever going for anything that's outside of like what your wheelhouse is, let's say you're going for a new job, you have a new goal. By definition, if you're pushing out of your own comfort zone, you're going to be uncomfortable, right? You're going to go into the discomfort zone. Like you're leaving the comfort zone, right? So you're going to be uncomfortable. But what happens is for a lot of us, we have that, instead of just feeling that discomfort, like, of course I'm going to be uncomfortable when I'm trying to start a business, or I'm going to, quit my job and change my identity, whatnot. Instead of just that, we add on a lot of dirty pain to it. So we add on a lot of like, this shouldn't be happening. Like we panic about it. Like, oh my God, this is too uncomfortable. Maybe I shouldn't have this much fear. Maybe this means I shouldn't do it. I should just quit now. This is, and so we create this panic, right? And a lot of what I was talking about in that article in my podcast is like, you have to expect it. Of course I'm going to be uncomfortable. Of course I'm going to be scared. Of course I'm going to feel uncertain, right? I'm doing something new that I've never done. Of course I'm going to fail at it. Of course I'm going to try things and it's not going to work. And when I expect that, when like that's not a problem, that's literally the path to where I want to go. Like I have to go through these and I expect it, and I don't make it mean anything about me. It doesn't mean that I'm not good enough. It doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. It doesn't mean that it's never going to work. It doesn't mean all these other stories. If I just like feel the fear and be like, and do it anyway, right? One of my friends who's a life coach she always says gag and go. Like I'm going to feel like I'm going to gag. Like I'm going to feel like I'm going to throw up. And I'm still going to do it anyways, Like you're going to have to feel that discomfort and do it anyway. I think when you can really get used to that and not be like surprised that discomfort is there, the discomfort's not that bad. Like the feeling of fear is not that, it doesn't hurt that much. You're just like, oh, it's there. I think the reason we give up is we just panic that like it shouldn't be here. I should know more. I should feel more certain. I should feel more confident. And it's like, no, you shouldn't, because you're doing something new. You're going to feel not that confident. You're going to feel doubtful. It's going to feel like wonky and like you don't have any legs to stand on. That's the way it should feel, and everything is okay. And I feel like when you can calm your brain down, like, we're all right. Of course, we're doing something big. It's going to feel like crap. It's okay. We could still do this. It makes it so much easier to just like feel that discomfort and not let it stop you.
It's true. It's very true. And, as you were talking, I was thinking of, because we've all, what's funny is we forget that by the way, I need to know the name of your friend who says that.
Oh, yeah. Olivia Zacro.
Okay, because
she is she coaches lawyers. She's called the Less Stressed Lawyer, I think, on
how
Instagram.
awesome. I love this. So
no, I think if you don't feel like you're going to throw up, your dream isn't big enough. Like the thing you're going after is not big enough. Like it shouldn't be a reason not to do it. It should be like a telltale sign, like, oh, the thing I'm doing is pushing me to grow enough to make me want to vomit right now. And that's okay. Like, I feel like if you can reinterpret those signs in your body, like I think a lot of times, again, if you cannot panic about it, but just be like, yeah, I'm going after big things and that's scary and that's okay. I can be scared and do it anyway.
I think that panic thing is like really hitting the nail on the head because I've heard people talk about many different things, but I've never heard anybody say that you're doing something and you just panic and you become like a deer in headlights and you just go into your fight, flight, or freeze.
Totally.
Okay, so let me ask you this question then, right? Because like in an industry that, because many industries are seeing this happen right now, there's a lot of people leaving and I'm not entirely sure leadership has figured out where the problem really lies, which is fine. They'll figure out eventually. Yeah. But so let's say somebody's in an organization and they are feeling like, well, let me ask you this. First, how do you know if it's like time to quit versus like, because like in some cases, wherever you go, there you are, like you are the problem and you need 100%. To work on your stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know, like, how do you figure that part out? Or is that like, do you have to actually trial and error it to figure that out?
How I work with people in my membership, I'm glad that you brought that up because a lot of people I don't think realize this. And like one of the first things I do with people, especially like a lot of people come to me because they're really unhappy in their careers. They're really miserable and they want to quit. And one of the things I try to slow us down with is the solution really never is to just jump from job to job because you're just going to keep hoping that something outside of you is going to like magically fix it. And the reality is that anywhere you go, that you're going to encounter things that are going to cause stress and anxiety or whatnot. Like either it's going to be a boss, it's going to be coworkers, it's going to be clients, it's going to be the demands, it's going to be deadlines, it's going to be, there's nowhere where you're going to be like, everything is just perfect. I love everyone I work with. Everybody has a personality that matches mine. I mean, like that's just not a possibility really anywhere. And so a lot of what we do is first slow down to figure out like what you said, like what am I bringing to the table that's causing this? Like for a lot of us, we're people pleasers. So we never speak up and then we become resentful and angry and we keep taking things on and then we wonder why we're miserable. Like a lot of us are perfectionists where we have to be perfect. We go above and beyond as soon as, whatever the task is, like we don't ask for help. We want to like be the star employee. We're used to being like the A+ student. A lot of us are overachievers, right? A lot of us are like this hustle culture. We constantly feel guilt, like we want to take on more. We're constantly telling ourselves we're going to get fired if we don't do, 110%. And so if you have those tendencies, it doesn't matter where you go. Like everywhere you go, there you are. You're bringing that same brain with you to the next place. And you're hoping that someone else is going to put boundaries for you. You're hoping that like your boss just magically gives you just enough work so you're not too stressed, right? Like that doesn't work because your boss is busy doing his or her own thing, right? They don't know how much you have on your plate. They're going to keep dumping things. If you keep taking it, they're going to delegate more. And so a lot of what this work is really like figuring out how do I show up and how do I want to show up? How do I set boundaries? How do I speak up even when it's scary? How do I advocate for the things that I want? How do I stop feeling guilty about saying no and like closing my laptop at 6:00 and not checking emails? Like that's sort of the core work that you have to do before you even really realize like, is it the job or is it me, right? Can I get like a real sense of like whether, I need to work on my own kind of thoughts? The next going back to like, there is no like scientific, like this is when it's right time to quit. For every person, it's going to be different. And some people like can't because like financially I can't afford to leave right now or whatnot. And so a lot of what I work with people is like, everything we've been talking about is like, how do I manage my own mind in this place, right? And how do I decide for myself when it's time to leave, right? When is it time for me? It may not be, there's no perfect time. Maybe it's not the right time. But for a lot of people, it's like, you know what? I'm just choosing that this is the right time or I don't want to be around these people or whatnot. But for a lot of other people, it's more of like, how do I not, I think I see so many of my clients where a lot of what I coach on, I'm like, it's like, that's not even a problem for you to, let's say, worry about. Like they're like, oh, they're so inefficient. They do this in such an inefficient way. I'm like, what are you getting mad about? It's not your business. Like, is it your problem? Let them do it inefficiently, you know? And like, we work a lot on like all of these things that we do to get ourselves so upset about why did my manager do this? And why did he say it like that? And why is she acting like, it's like, if we can just give everyone back their stuff and we worry about ourselves and we worry about what we're coming to work to do and what we're not and stuff, it can make corporate America, I'm not saying it's going to be like your favorite place. It doesn't have to be, right? Your job can just literally be the investor in your life. Like, I'm going to make money here. It gives me a paycheck. That's all I need to worry about until I'm ready to leave, right? And so I work with a lot of people on managing their own mind, and that in and of itself is what helps you determine, is it time to leave, is it not? Because I just decide, because I want something new, not because I have to leave, because I have to get away from these people, or I have to like, it's more of like, I work with a lot of people that are like, you know what, now I know I could stay, but I just choose to leave because I want something more, better. I want to try something new. And it's such a different place than from this place of like panic where it's like, I have to leave or I'm going to die here. Or it's like, I have to take the next job because I just can't stand it. What we work on is like really just learning how to manage your mind so you don't have to get to that point.
I think that's a really key thing, is because I think a lot of us will stay in a place where it pushes us to the edge and like we spontaneously combust and just like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what's got to happen, but it's not ideal for sure.
No.
I want to actually come back to something that you said there, which is, this is a philosophy. I want to deconstruct this a little bit because we are conditioned into this really heavily. You said the company that I work with is an investor in me. They're paying my money and, paying my bill. Now, the stories that we've all been told, work is like family. You have to really love, there's like a lot of stuff in there. And what I've come to realize over the last 10 years or so is that that's a really exploitative idea that really only helps the company mostly. And we are not, and you may be able to have a healthy relationship that way if the person, like the employee, is informed and understands. But for the most part, we feel like it's a failing within us if we do not have this deep passion for our job, or it's not like family, or we're not willing to sacrifice, or so on. So can you talk a little bit about how that section of it?
Sure. Yeah. I think that, we just have, corporate America has done a wonderful job of like really getting us to feel this level of guilt that we should have towards people. And one of the first things I really remind people is like, it is a transactional relationship. I do something for something, right? This isn't like family where it's an unconditional love or whatever. It's like, you pay me to do these tasks and only these tasks. And they do try to take advantage where it's like, I hire you to do these tasks and then I throw all these other tasks and we just keep taking it on, as opposed to like, okay, but are you going to pay me more? Or what happened with this? This is what I was hired for. And I feel like the more we realize it isn't a family, and we know that because they'll fire you as soon as they need to, right? There's no like loyalty kind of the other way. But I think like when we kind of go back to that and understand that and know that that's okay. And then I think the other thing that you were mentioning that's really big in our culture, and it's also very big in this culture in like Western, I think, culture in America. There's this idea that you have this one passion, or you have to find this fulfillment in the work that you do. And a lot of that comes with this idea that like this is going to sound, we all are extremely unique and extraordinary. I don't mean to say like every person is special, and I truly believe that, and we all have different gifts and stuff. But I think we have this like almost saviorism where it's like, I have to save the world somehow. I have to do something that's so big and so grand. So I will constantly coach people where they're like, I just feel like I should be doing more. I should be doing bigger things. I should be doing, I should have this one passion. And it's not to say that that's not like something that you can go after, but I find that so many people, even when they're doing really great things that they love, they're constantly beating themselves up because it should be more. It should be bigger. It should be, this like, we have these like 30 under 30 and these like, things where we try to create these like underdog stories, and the person goes on to make billions of dollars, and we all have these ideas of like this, I need to go after like some huge thing. And I don't know, I just have really embraced the idea of like none of that is ever necessary. Like there's no need to be a savior to all people. There's no need to do stuff that's going to change the world. There's no need like that. It's so much pressure on one person. And I feel like for so many of us, even if we really slow down, it's like if you could change the couple of people in your life, around you's life, if you can give them more attention, if you can be more present in your community, the ripple effect on our world would be so much bigger than trying to, create some startup or whatever that is going to change the world. And I think when you go into it, it's not to say that you can't try to find something that's more aligned with you, something that you enjoy doing. But I think that we have this idea that we should love what we do every day and we should have such a big passion for it, and as if like there's one passion that we need to go discover. And the reality is most of us, all humans, are very multifaceted. You can develop passions for a lot of things. You can love learning about a lot of things, and it never has to be the end all be all. It does not have to be the thing that fulfills your whole life. Like, it never will be, truly. Like, if you know, I teach a lot in my group, is that everything is 50-50. No matter what, it doesn't matter how great it becomes. There's always 50% good, 50% bad. And so we think I'm going to find this thing and every day is going to be rainbows and butterflies. Every day I'm going to feel so excited to do the stuff I want to do. But it never works like that, because even if you're doing, let's say, the painting that you love to do, there's going to be 50% of stuff around that business you don't want to do. And that's okay. It's just that when your expectation was, I'm going to be happy 100% of the time, and you're not happy 100% of the time, you start realizing, like, you think like, oh, I'll never be happy. There's something wrong with me. And I feel like when you change your expectation, it becomes so much easier to be like, yeah, of course, this is fun to do, and I have other passions, and I want to do stuff outside of this, and this just fulfills my, the financial need I have, so that I don't, there's no requirement that I have to love every single day of my life.
So first of all, I feel like you said all those things directly for me, and we just recorded a coaching session. So I just want to thank you for how that was just really, really awesome. Honestly, I'm having to hold back lots of tears right now. There's some serious growth that's happened just now. Thank you. But I think something else on the other side, let me come back to that, because, something I started to, and it resonated with me in that, a long time ago, I realized that, my sister said to me that you make a difference in people's, like, your individual people's lives, like your kids, your family, your friends, like people who you've chosen to keep around you, your community, that kind of thing. And that when you change their world, like, that's a giant world that you're changing. Huge. And I think that it made me start to think about my life differently. And then instead of thinking about my life in terms of how can I be successful, I started to think about what do I want my life to look like on a day-to-day basis, like right now? Yes, like when I wake up in the morning, what do I want to do, right? And then like cultivating the activities that will both allow me to sustain that in the future. But like that required a giant divorce, as you said earlier, going back full circle, from the stories that we were fed. Because you and I and other people like us have already made this decision, and we're still, it's like it's a daily practice, because, the system of the world keeps telling that story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'd actually like to ask, because you've mentioned your membership a couple of times, and I want to actually dive a little bit deeper into your membership. So I want to learn a little bit more about that, because I think that's where the rubber hits the road for a lot of people. So let's say, what happens in your membership? So somebody finds you and they're like, either they're ready to quit and they're coming to you because they're desperate and they're like, I'm going to quit. And you have that different conversation with them, or they're like, something isn't right. And I feel like I found you for a reason and I want to learn. So what happens once they join your membership? And
it's actually both, I have a very wide range of people. So there's some people that are like, I need to quit now. And there's some people that are like, I just know something's wrong and I don't even know if I want to quit, but I want to do something different. So the membership is, going back to the kind of analogy of a gym, like I liken it to kind of a gym for your mind, because it's something that it's like a practice. Like the reason I went with the membership model is because it's not something that's like, you're just going to learn this thing in 3 months and then you're going to have a happy career. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's really like, what I teach people is how to manage their mind. And when you learn how to manage your mind, it becomes so much easier to decide what you want to do. Are you going to stay in this career? Are you going to leave? Are you going to go after that secret dream that you haven't told anybody about? Are you going to just, like you said, like kind of slow down and enjoy where you're at right now and not try to save the world and really just love being with your kids, let's say, or whatnot? And for every person, it's different. But how it works in the membership is I have basically like a roadmap. It's 4 stages, and each stage has videos and worksheets that walk you through. The first stage is learning how to manage your mind. It's the tools for the mindset stuff. The second stage is learning how to get out of burnout and love where you're at. And so we talked about like learning how you're showing up, like the people pleasing, the boundaries, all of that. Stage 3 is figuring out what you want in your life, because I think for so many people, the reason they feel so stuck is because they have no idea what they want to do. And that's because we've spent so long doing what everybody else told us we should do, or what they think we should do, or what is successful. And so it really requires peeling back, like, who am I and what do I want for this one life? What do I want to experience, right? Not just in work, but just in my life. And then stage 4 is like, how do we actually go after it? How do we create the plans? How do we experiment? How do we figure out what the career is going to be before we make a jump? And so those are all there for you to use at your own kind of pace, whichever stage you're in, doing that work. And then I think the main value of the club, it's called the Quitter Club, is we do weekly coaching calls. So it's either 1 or 2 times a week where we coach so that you can practice this thought work that I teach, the thought work that like will help you manage your mind and your thoughts and these stories around what you're doing to help you like really like reduce the stress and anxiety and frustration and overwhelm and confusion and stuckness that everybody feels in their lives, so that they can figure out what it is they want to do and start creating that. And so we have an online, we have a community where we all post and you can get coaching, but there's these live calls that you can come to, and it's like, just talk about what, like, this is what's happening. I'm really frustrated because at work this is happening. This is how I feel. And then I coach you through it to kind of figure out like how you want to show up. What is it that you want to do? And then we have like a bunch of other stuff. We have a private podcast where you can listen to the coaching calls kind of on the go. We have master classes. We have like these 90-day workshops where we set goals for 90 days and accountability partners, all that stuff. But really the crux of it, the point of the whole membership is for people who are like, this can't be it. Like, this isn't my life. I cannot spend my life hating Monday, living for the weekend, feeling anxiety every Sunday. Like, there has to be something different. And I promise you there is. And it's really like learning, how do I unlearn a lot of what we've talked about? The stories, the need to hustle, the like not ever resting, the people pleasing, the perfectionism. How do I stop all that so that I can actually start doing the things I want to do, so I can actually rest, so I can find joy, so I can enjoy being here, instead of like, once I get there, once I get the degree, once I get this new job, once I make this much money, then I can be happy. It's like, how do we start doing that now and start figuring out what you want to be doing for the rest of your life?
It's so, I love what you said that, because we've been conditioned to believe that we'll invest X, Y, Z until we can start our lives, whenever that life is, when that happens, right? And Lisa, who I had, but she has a very similar thing for people who are at retirement, who when they get to retirement age and they retire, nobody's taught them how to start the rest of your life, right? And so none of us are given that muscle in terms of how do you, and so I think that one of the things that you're really hitting the nail on the head about specifically is this idea that, actually, let me pull back a little bit, because as you were talking, this is what I thought to myself. I thought, we were fed this story, okay? And our parents were fed these stories. And I was talking to someone the other day who was talking about how each generation is responding to whatever circumstance it is that they had when they were growing up, and then conditioning their children, so on, right? Now we're at a stage where we have this 100 or 200 year written knowledge where we can see how all this unfolded, right? And I think for me, when I started to understand that we are all conditioned to be a compliant workforce for a very specific reason. And, in my mind, I was like, I wanted someone to blame for this, right? And the truth is that every single person in the world is currently complicit in perpetuating ideas that we really we didn't even start these ideas. Somebody 100 years ago started it, and the idea has just kept going. And we have attached an idea of rightness to that's the way. And then then it becomes, you guys lied to me, who programmed me, or I want to be right because that's a story I've had, and I think that this is actually going to bring me. So part of the work that we've all had to do is deconstructing the need for blame. How has therapy played a part in this for you?
Big part, but not in the way traditionally. I think, like, I got my undergrad degree in psychology. I truly believe in therapy. I think therapy serves a really great purpose. And I think a lot of the work I've done outside of, so my degree, I thought about being a therapist before I went to be a lawyer. And then afterwards now, like the last couple of years, the amount that I've dived into like mindset work and the brain and just how our brains work, I think it is hugely important, because I think so many of us are really struggling with these deep feelings of sadness and depression and lostness. And I think that therapy is a really beautiful way of like digging into that and really understanding how some of the traumas and the programming that we all kind of got as children has really played into why we are the way that we are and how we react. And I think you can create a really great understanding for yourself. Like, why are my reactions this way? Why am I, as opposed, because I think for most of us, it's like, we just blame ourselves. Like, why can't I just not get angry? But it's like, why do I get angry, right? Where did this anger come from and whatnot? I will say for me, like one of the reasons I actually really leaned into coaching, and I think coaching really changed my life, is for better or worse, I was blessed enough that I think just naturally, my natural disposition tends to be a little bit more on the positive side. And I think I didn't struggle so much with things that traditionally therapy helps with. So I went to therapy, but I felt like, okay, I know where this comes from, but what do I do now? Like, I didn't feel like I was getting a lot of tools. Like, okay, well, how do I handle the anxiety that I'm getting right now because of what I'm going to do? We can talk about my childhood and where it came from, but I wanted more of like, well, what do I, how do I turn this into like what I, as a tool that can help me in my day-to-day life. And it's not to say that some therapies do that. It was, for me, I felt like when I was there, therapy helps me with what I needed, but there was an end point that I was like, okay, I'm not really knowing where to go from there. And so I think with coaching, what it helps me with, and there was a therapist once that I had on my podcast who explained it because he did therapy and coaching, and he would say like, therapy helps people. He would help people go from bad to good, and coaching helped them go from good to great. And I felt like that was sort of where like a lot of the concepts, kind of the ideas of why our brains do the things they do, and, kind of the false ways in which kind of the illusions that we have and whatnot, that all comes from really like learning more about psychology and the brain. But I think for me, I wanted to like figure out a way for a lot of people that maybe didn't feel depressed or didn't feel like, I need to go into my childhood trauma, but I just want to know, like, I don't want to be upset every day. I don't want to be stressed every day. I don't want to be frustrated every day. What do I do with that? And so I think that was what sort of like led me more to coaching than it, because I had considered like, do I want to go back and become a therapist? Do I want to like do this stuff? And I was really realizing like I wanted to help people more kind of go after bigger goals, go after dreams, just be okay with, the fear and all that stuff that comes along with it. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Oh my God. So, and you know what? I actually want to take that somewhere because you actually helped in more ways than you know. So one of the bigger challenges I think that exists is that, and I'm going to actually confess to something. So I used to be all about everybody has to do therapy. I was like an evangelist, right? And my sister is not really into therapy, right? And I have a few friends who don't go into therapy, but they're also doing a lot of work, right? So they're doing a lot of the work. And through working with them, I grew and started to understand that there are a lot of different tools. Therapy is one of many tools, and not everybody needs the same thing at the same time for the same thing. So I'm glad you answered it the way you did, because I think that one of the biggest, I was conditioned, right? Because we grew up, if you have problems, go to therapy, talk therapy, right? Now I've been in therapy since I was, I grew up in trauma. So like the whole nine, so I've been in therapy for many, many, many years. I need that. Right?
Totally.
But not everyone does. And so but what I realized at a certain point in therapy was that, I have been dealing with this shit for a while, but I'm not moving forward. Like I feel like I'm sorting this out, but I'm not moving forward. This was about 6 or 7 years ago, and it made me realize that there were other pieces to the puzzle that I was missing. So what I really loved about what you shared is that there are people who are going to listen who are like, I know I need a therapist because I've got X, Y, Z issue, and that's what it is. Some aren't going to be sure, but others are going to have gone down the therapy route and been like, this isn't for me for whatever reason. It's not helping. But then they feel like they've hit the wall, right? Thud. Yes. What do I do next? Where do I go? Yes. If I'm not going to see a therapist, then what? So what I really love about this is that, I've had a couple other people who've done other things. And I love it when somebody says, no, I did it this way or I did it that way. Yeah. Because it provides another avenue for someone for whom therapy is not the right option, or for whom they've already done that. They've sorted that shit out. They've got other stuff that they need to work on now. And it's not, the therapist isn't the appropriate tool for that.
Exactly.
So,
and
absolutely.
I think that our culture loves to put certain things on pedestals or whatnot, which is fine. But one of the things that I learned early on is that our brain loves black and white, and we love certainty. So we want to know, like, this is the thing that's going to change me. And I think I just realized, like, everything is just a tool, and there's tons of different tools, and nothing is the one thing. Even the thing I teach, I talk about this, like, thought work and mindset work is not the answer to every problem you're going to have. There's times where you don't need to manage your mind. You need to, like, get out of that. Like, if you're in an abusive relationship,
out of the abusive
you need
situation.
to get out of you need to get out. Like, and I think a lot of times people are constantly looking at, like, well, and you see trolls on social media of, like, it's like, well, that doesn't work in this situation. Like, yeah, of course it doesn't work in that situation, because it's not meant to work in every single situation, right? Like, nothing does. And so I think I look at, like, there's a lot of things, and so many people in my program, there's times where people will come and I will tell them, like, this is not the place for that. Like, you need to go to therapy for that. Like, that is something that you really need to work through with a therapist, one-on-one. And so, like, because I'm not going to take on something that I can't help you with, And equally, I have so many people in my program who are doing therapy and doing coaching. And they constantly tell me, like, I talked to my therapist about this, and they come to coaching for something different, right? So it's like, this is where I go to maybe work through these issues. And then I also want to figure out what I'm going to do next in my career, and I work through that in coaching. And so I think it never has to be an all or nothing thing. I think they go beautifully together. I think there's places where you do want to dive deeper, maybe in a one-on-one setting, and you want to be in a place where it's going to be more trauma informed and you're going to talk about traumas. And then you want to be in a place where you're like, okay, but I also need to, like, figure out what the hell I'm doing next, and I need to make decisions.
I need some
and
tactics,
I need to learn.
dude.
Yeah, tactics. Yeah, and I need some strategies, and I need some tools, and I need to talk this through. And so I think, as I go through this work too, I'm constantly like, oh, cool, this is another tool I can use when I'm super anxious and this isn't working for me, and I'll try this other one. Like, there's no reason why it has to be just one.
I love it. And you know what? And I think that's a really fabulous thing to sort of end on. And the idea that there are many solutions, like, and I think actually I got this message from the universe earlier, and that's actually where my existential crisis is coming from, is the understanding that there's a lot of answers. And I'm like, oh my God, I want there to be just one answer. And I'm freaking the fuck out right now. So that's where I'm at. It's totally cosmic, but it's like, you're absolutely right. Like, there's a lot. So, okay.
You can find me really anywhere at Lessons from a Quitter. On Instagram is mostly where I hang out. My podcast is called Lessons from a Quitter. And then you can go to lessonsfromaquitter.com to really get, all of the information about the membership or the articles that I have, the podcast that I have. It's all on there.
I'm just going to say, I'm actually going to say this, it was going to be the beginning. Today's guest is such a brilliant, honestly, I'm going to call you a thought leader, because that is exactly what you are. I feel like every person who is that I have ever talked to who is in corporate America could benefit from listening to your podcast, reading what you have to say, because what I found is that you are the empowerer of the employee, right? The empowerer of the person who, like, there's a lot of articles and things out there teaching people this is what you're doing wrong, or this is how a company is supposed to behave, or this is what they're supposed to do. But it's what you do is you sort of plant the seed that allows us to see from within ourselves, right? And feel strong. Yes. And so I think it's like, for anyone who is feeling like, I feel like I used to love my job, but I don't anymore, or I'm feeling tired, or I'm not sure, they need to go to Lessons from a Quitter. Join your membership, become your best friend, whatever. Like,
definitely come become my best friend. I love that. That's going to be my new tagline. I love that so much. The empower of the employee. What a great, of course. Thank you. And I really appreciate you having me. It's been so fun. And anybody that doesn't feel empowered in your job, come find me, because I would love to help.